Jordan Peterson actually brings up quite a lot is that the at least a theme that he draws from the Bible, this may just be his interpretation, but is that the idea that speech is the way to rectify the world and set it to right. Like that's where you begin to set the evils of the world to right, or the wrongs, is by speaking the truth. And so to what extent do you actually think that the developed world as such was founded on those Judeo-Christian values? And let's just start with that. And do you think that those are the reasons for the prosperity, or do you think it's perhaps the freedom that has come along with those? Because I know some historians, two guys whose names I completely cannot draw on right now, but they wrote a book called Why Nations Fail. And the overarching theme from the entire book is that freedom, whether that's political or economic freedom, that as that increases, societies become more prosperous, and then as that gets taken away throughout history, then they decline in their prosperity, in their economic success and political success, just however you want to define it, like societal standards and living standards of living. And so do you think we're basing that on those Judean Christian values, or do you think that it's the freedom that's come along with them that is the thing that's made those nations prosperous?
This is an extremely difficult and complicated question that we could spend hours on. The freedom, I will just put straight out, it's the freedom that is creating the prosperity, but freedom is intrinsically paired with responsibility, and responsibility requires some kind of a moral sensibility. And so Christianity and Judeo-Christian values can provide a moral sensibility, and they did provide a broadly common sensibility for most of the people throughout the West, because most of the people throughout the West were generally or broadly Judeo-Christian. That's not to say necessarily that everybody has to be Judeo-Christian or even based on Judeo-Christian values or whatever, but ultimately is that Judeo-Christian values led to tyranny, and then they were secularized in the sense that people were given that First Amendment, as we call it, freedom of belief. And in the process, that freedom and that secularization, that taming of the religious impulse to collectivize, enabled the growth of prosperity. So it was having the moral backbone that came with having those values, combined with the ability to be free and to pursue one's own self-interest and pursuit of happiness, as it were. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness are the three inalienable rights named specifically in the Declaration of Independence that we threw at your bloody island in 1776. So that said,
Technically, I'm Irish, so we were also victims of the British Empire.
Well, there we go. Okay. So true enough. Sorry about that. No,
in Northern Ireland is complicated.
I think you were victims of us too. But I think they call that potato splaining now, so we're not allowed to do that. Sorry, you don't get to be oppressed, even though you have been. It's just it's off the line. So I think Peterson's generally correct, but I don't know that it's. I mean, maybe this is a very Judeo-Christian thing, because you can look at John 1. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, etc. So you can look at things like that. Those values are there, and obviously the tradition and the Judaic thing. Jesus is challenging the Pharisees. The Pharisees are making arguments about the law, blah, blah, blah. And Jesus is giving, these allegorical speeches and these sermons and things like that. So he's using speech to change things. I think the general principle is, in fact, though, that ideas have consequences. It's a very simple thing to understand, is that ideas have consequences, and as they spread. So when you have ideas like that we should put freedom first, but that to understand freedom requires to understand responsibility, well, then you have something there. That's a set of ideas that comes out of what we would identify as the Scottish or British Enlightenment, as compared to, say, the French Enlightenment, which is a bit different, and the German Enlightenment, which went idealist and got a bit weird. That very specifically created situations that seemed to, in a word, work. Those ideas were very successful. So it's the values contained within Christianity, however, did provide that kind of common sensibility, because what we had as a fundamental problem with liberalism, and this is people, the reactionaries are quick to point out liberalism generates communism, blah, blah, blah. This is incorrect. is that liberalism doesn't do what people want it to do when they're not thinking clearly about it. People believe, I hear this criticism all the time. They say that liberalism doesn't provide anybody meaning, and that's its greatest strength. People think about it completely wrongly because we're not thinking about what liberalism actually provides to people. Liberalism provides freedom. It provides the freedom to chase your own meaning where you want to find it. So if you want to be a freaking communist, you can be a freaking communist. If you want to be a Calvinist, you can be a Calvinist. If you want to be a Catholic, you can be a Catholic. If you want to be a Muslim, you can be a Muslim. If you want to find your meaning through crystals or going out on hikes or talking with friends or drinking good wine, whatever you want to do, you find your meaning your way. But if you think that the system is going to provide your meaning, you're completely wrong. And the question is, of course, everything comes in trade-offs. So the question is, there's a lot of people who fall through the cracks in liberalism because they can't figure out how to find meaning for themselves that actually means something. But on the other hand, when you have an enforced meaning structure, like say a universal Catholic church, there are a lot of people who fall through the cracks, who don't want to believe that way or worship that way or think that it matches what the Bible says. Or maybe they're Muslim and they don't care what the Bible says. Or maybe they're Jewish and they don't accept the gospel. And so, maybe you're feeding them beautiful jamon iberico to figure out if they're a Jew, and then you're killing them. I mean, this is the kind of thing where you don't want there are people falling through the cracks in both regards. And liberalism is supposed to be a conflict management solution that allows people to pursue meaning in their own way, and that leads people not to necessarily judge people for finding their meaning in a different way. But that you could say is a Judeo-Christian value: judge not lest ye be judged, treat the neighbor as you would want to be treated. These are definitely principles that were, have cropped up in other places, but they're also very strong and very prominent, put very deeply and upfront in the Judeo-Christian system. Another thing, though, that I think is much more important within the Judeo-Christian system that led to liberalism, and it's probably the most important idea. We can talk about the word and the speech and the arguing and this and that and the other is it's the idea of the imago Dei, that we were made in the image of God. So this is the basis of the universal humanity claim of liberalism. This is the basis of all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. This is the basis of everything. Why? Because each of us, regardless of what we look like, regardless of our attributes, regardless of what we've done with our lives, regardless of the mistakes we've made, this is a very powerful idea. We're made in the image of God. And this is, kind of the deepest root of what we might call equality theory, which the critical theories explicitly reject. And I think that has been an incredibly important value for us to all remember. Like, you and I may be different in some ways, but, there's some, whether you want to refer to it religiously as some kind of a divine spark, or if you want to refer to it in another sense, as there's some kind of profound commonality between us. Because we're both human, we both bleed red, we both experience pain, we both enjoy certain things, etc. That puts people on a kind of footing to treat other people the way that that you yourself would want to be treated, and it opens up the ability to look at individuals not necessarily as members of collectives. Each person is, made in the image of God in the Judeo-Christian view, and is therefore afforded the respect and dignity that comes with such a thing. And at the same time, each person is, a child of God in the same sense, that is an individual who has to be judged on their merits, has to be judged on the content of their character, as the saying has been made cliche, unfortunately. They have to be judged on who they happen to be and what they've done with their lives, things that are worth judging. So you've mentioned Jordan Peterson, and that's, I think, where we get the growth of something very valuable out of this bedrock that I've just mentioned. And that thing is that Jordan Peterson says, that societies always form hierarchies. They will, it's one of his, if you were to boil Jordan Peterson down to like a handful of points, that's one of the maybe top three.
The lobsters.
Societies will always form hierarchies. So you have the lobsters, that's right. You have to figure out what kind of a hierarchy do you want? And his point, to maybe oversimplify it, but one of his strongest points, in my opinion, is that when you base your hierarchy on competence, you minimize corruption. Again, everything's trade-offs. It's not necessarily to say that, a competence-based hierarchy is totally realistic. It's not to say one thing. It's to say that when you base your hierarchy on competence, you minimize corruption. And you're not going to root out corruption. Corruption is always going to be there. And in fact, this is almost just by definition. Corruption is you could define corruption meaningfully as the deviation from competence, the promotion by some variable other than merit or character. And character is, in a sense, just merit within, personal integrity, whether you see that as something mental and emotional or whether you see that as something spiritual is up to you. So this grows out of those same ideas. So when you kind of combine all of that and you say, well, how important are Judeo-Christian values? Well, you have Judeo-Christian values now providing certain common ideas, like that we're made in the image of God, that we're children of God. Each person's an individual under that, but that we have a great deal in common and we can understand the world and we can put certain values first, like that we should judge by character, like that we should not prejudge lest we be judged, that we should accord one another with a certain level of dignity that certainly isn't based in prejudice, that isn't diminished, I should say, by prejudice. And that we should, when you get to especially the Protestant side of these things, which is famous for its alleged work ethic, which was very significant in the founding of the United States, of course, that, we should be responsible, that we have a responsibility to be good, do good, and to do things, but to do so volitionally rather than through the compulsion of the state or through the compulsion of the priest or through the compulsion of some cartel or mafia or whatever. When you start to look at all of that, you can see how that kind of backbone of values, and also, as you noted, the truth being kind of central to all of this, veering toward the truth, always veering toward the truth. If we get Lutheran, here I stand for I can do no other, so help me God. He believed he was speaking the truth and that he could not violate, whether he was right or wrong, what he believed to be true, at tremendous threat to himself. So you have all of these kinds of mentalities that go along with that kind of Judeo-Christian backbone. Not to say that other traditions don't have other backbones, and it's not to say that we can't, find meaning and value in other ways. But we have to remember also that the one of these values was also, when we're coming out of the Reformation, is that, who are we as man to claim that we understand God and to speak for God for all men? So there we get to that, back to that freedom of speech and freedom of belief thing in the First Amendment. So you can kind of see how those values are all kind of there. But the thing is we are in a position now where we have to recognize that freedom, can veer two ways. It can veer toward prosperity, or it can veer toward kind of destructive hedonism that kind of ends in a nihilistic, bad state. And the difference really comes down to understanding that freedom has to be paired with responsibility. If you're going to be free, it's your duty as a price of that freedom to be as responsible as you can. And that's, of course, what people get mad about.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. Don't forget our sponsor, ExpressVPN, and my book, Brexit, The Establishment Civil War, can both be found in the links in the description below. And also, please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. It's the best way to help us grow. Until next time, thanks for listening. Screw the hedge funds.
You can make as many rules as you want, but if there's no teeth behind them, what's the point?
Well, like Citadel is potentially just gone in a few months. It feels like financial institutions, that they are all laughing at us by buying GME. Screw the hedge funds. Like, I will lose my entire investment if it brings them down.
Why on earth, last May, could you buy the entire company for $200 million?
What's been happening on Reddit and in social media and in the marketplace has never been seen before.
I argue that nothing is off the table. There is nothing off the table when dealing with the volumes of money in something as big as the United States stock market.
The hedge funds have clearly underestimated a group of people raised on Friday night World of Warcraft raids.
Dark pools, they're another mechanism to manipulate and cheat. Mainstream journalists don't say these things for a number of reasons. One is their sources are the people that I'm talking about, and so they can't call somebody a crook.
Superstonk and the other communities that have emerged are a hive mind, the likes of which we have never seen before. It's madness and brilliance, insanity and genius all rolled into one. It's very possible that Citadel will be gone in a few months. And not just Citadel, but the entire financial system has the potential to come crashing down. These crooks continue to gamble recklessly with the world economy, and this could be the moment that they finally get their justice.